Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers are advised that this podcast contains the names of people who are deceased.
I'd like to welcome listeners back to another episode of the ILSC, Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation's 30-year podcast series. And today we've got Yawuru man and leader Pat Dodson joining us on his country here in sunny Broome. And it's a pleasure to have you join us, Pat, and to share some of your insights and some of your ideas about people in country and the important connection that people have got, particularly with their country and what people have been through over the last perhaps 50 years. Certainly from my experience, Patrick has been one of the formidable voices for Indigenous people, leading land rights, native title, reconciliation and a number of things. So welcome, Pat.
Thanks you, Joe, and you're very welcome into this country. And I come dressed, as you can see, for a Broome person in the middle of the summer. But no, very good to see you, and congratulations on all the work that's been done through the ILSC and the efforts that are going in to ensure that people can get back to their country. They can get on their country and do things and find the refreshing spirit that brings them back to life. So ILSC plays a very important role in that first step in that process. But thank you for the work that you and your board do, and for the people over the years, like Mr. Ross and others that I know who played roles. Thank you for all that work. A great insight of government and Aboriginal leadership to create a fund that Aboriginal people could go to buy land, their traditional land, and to get back onto those places for economic purposes, but also for cultural and social purposes. But a very important component in the way governments can enable Aboriginal people to sustain and retain their cultural connections to country.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming to Broome.
No worries. It's as I said, it's an absolute pleasure to be here and to be speaking with you. You've done many things over the course of your career so far, Pat, and I'm one of the few people that have been fortunate enough to have worked with you on some of those things. Not many, but a couple of things. Most recently in the North Australian space, and have been obviously very beneficial to have your wisdom along for that. But you've done many important roles, like the CEO of the Central Land Council, Royal Commissioner in the Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, obviously a Senator in the Australian Parliament, a number of other things, leading the Lingiari Foundation. I remember one of the first things we interacted with around the work that you did around onshore and offshore water rights in the early days. But there's a whole range of other things that obviously you've done, and you've contributed to the national discussion about the relationship between Indigenous people and the nation state. Did you want to just touch on some of those things?
Yeah, well, I had the privilege, of course, growing up with your mum and dad on the banks of the Katherine River. Back in the day when it was a little place, and we saw many layers of injustice, I suppose, in the town. There were a lot of good people there, but systemically it was a native welfare-dominated environment. I saw kids taken away by the welfare. We went up and down the river as kids playing. We'd look after the horses and ride them during the times that the stockmen, Aboriginal stockmen, brought cattle in to put on the train to go to Darwin.
Yeah.
So connection to country was, even though I'm a Broome person, we still lived on the land and the water, and hunted and fished and gathered and camped and walked up and down and all over the place. So fond memories of Katherine. I suppose when the question of the strike really started off, this debate about land rights, Vincent Lingiari. Obviously the Pilbara people had been involved before that, when they withdrew their labour from the stations, and they put them out of a panic. And
that was in the 40s, right?
That was in the 40s, 48, 49, or 49, a bit earlier, 46, 47. So this whole question of the rights of Aboriginal people to country and to be properly remunerated, paid proper wages,
Yeah.
treated like anything, slaves really, people were treated. So growing up as a kid, I saw a fair bit of that kind of treatment. We lived in fear of the big boss blokes who came into town,
Yeah.
and as kids we'd all hide and scatter. Because we heard stories about these guys are shooting people or belting them or chaining them up or doing other terrible things. So the question of how to deal with the Gurindji, which is not far
Yeah.
from Katherine, was a topic that was around as I was going through my secondary school down in Western Victoria. And of course the town was split and visitors were bussed into the place
Yeah.
to stir up racial division.
Yeah.
And I came back from one of the school breaks, and I think it was an auntie of yours actually that they're outside the town hall of Katherine, and the hall was packed with all of these anti-Aboriginal people, really. But she said to me, because I was the most privileged kid in the sense of having gone to school.
Yeah.
Mid-year, she said, go in and tell them what the truth is. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. They'll string me up, this mob. I said, I'll have to live to fight another day. So from there, I got to learn that you have to develop a strategic way of dealing with pressures and injustice and racist activities and ignorance. And that gave me an impetus to go to school and do, work as hard as I could to go through and to keep an eye on how people's access to their country was being facilitated or not. And of course, the famous blues that got up later on in Katherine about the Katherine Gorge, and I think relations of yours were involved in that as well, and other people, of course. But when it came to the Gurindji and their fight, it was hard to know because we all wanted to be stockmen.
Yeah.
We all wanted to go and work on the stations. And here we had a cattle station that senior Aboriginal people had walked off, and you had this vision, and you saw people that were living in, wasn't a lot of television, wasn't a lot of social media.
Yeah.
It was radio or communication, people coming backwards and forwards. And this whole world of the pastoral domination and say over the lives of people, not only as in terms of wages, but in social. Women were exploited, young fellows were exploited, work from dawn to dusk, no wages, nothing.
Yeah.
So the government of the day had to work out after a period of time, how can they give some kind of land tenure to Aboriginal people? And this is prior to the Land Rights Act. And they didn't know whether a lease, a licence, an easement or some other form of tenure ought to be given. Ultimately, they came up with some kind of leasehold.
Yeah.
And then out of that developed the struggle nationally with the Tent Embassy and with other Aboriginal groups around the country calling for land rights. Queensland, of course, was a very draconian state. You couldn't walk down the street more than 3 abreast, otherwise you'd be arrested. It'd be deemed to be a gathering.
Yeah.
So they had the Act, they used to call it, which is a really draconian, repressive Aboriginal piece of legislation that controlled and managed the lives of Aboriginal people. So you got a sense of there needs to be laws that are better than the ones we've got.
Yeah.
And they need to relate to Aboriginal people's right to land. We always knew, we grew up knowing people are connected to land. People walked,
Yeah.
people camped, people hunted, people fished, people had ceremony. So the fact that there was a cattle station which had Aboriginal people working at it, gradually they built fences and brought motor cars and bull buggies and different things, helicopters.
Yeah.
They all come later. But the backbone of that was built by the Aboriginal people, primarily. So how to get justice for people to land was a really important thing. And it was Whitlam when he came into power that looked at this, I think, and you had that famous Malariapum case, the Gove case, which the court couldn't deal with the question of sovereignty.
Yeah.
Because those old people came to the court and showed them the things that made them integrally connected to the land through their sacred objects, and explained that, and the court couldn't handle it, didn't know how to handle it.
Yeah.
And so you had the inquiry then under Woodward, and Woodward proposed, which is a real masterstroke, proposed a way that the Northern Territory Land Rights Act could be enacted, short of sovereignty, but giving people the best and strongest form of title that they could, which is the inalienable freehold title under the Land Rights Act. So that the struggle then, I ultimately got to work for the Central Land Council and spent years defending the rights that people had under the legislation.
Did you start there as a CEO?
No, I started as an employee under Mr. Ross. He was the secretary of they didn't have a management structure as such. He was the man that was everything.
Yeah.
And he related to the executive and the chair. So the chair and the executive pretty much ran the place. During my time, we created what was called the directorate and the management structure.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Ross went off to do some studies in Adelaide. And that's where there's a difference between the Northern Land Council and the Central Land Council. Central Land Council was set up mainly under bureaucrats from DAA, whereas the centre was more of a people's movement and dominated by the senior leaders. And gradually this management structure was created. I came there as the Education and Information Officer, I was called, which meant that I was the person responsible for the press releases, for the publication, for the field officers, going out to the constituents, to the communities, and relaying messages about meetings, the agenda, time, place, any other news that was relevant that they ought to know. Mining companies in the area, changes to legislation, etc., or attacks on the Act, and the need to come to these meetings. And then obviously the field officers would go out and do that work.
Yep.
I'd go at times. So it was a big area. It'd go right up to Kalkarinji from Alice Springs, Territory, Western Australian border, and across then to Tennant Creek, then down across to Barkly, to this side of Camberwell, then down south to back along the Planty Highway. So it was a big area of land. Diverse groups of Aboriginal people there. Very staunch. All the meetings were in the bush. Camping. We didn't have an organised kitchen initially.
Yeah.
But it was people on their country talking about their country and about how they were being impacted.
Yep.
And this is in a territory. So the territory government was trying to build its power base and strength and trying to get the Commonwealth government to give them control of the Act.
Yeah. Or
to make amendments to the Act in a way that would enhance their objectives rather than support the rights of the Aboriginal people under they're called traditional owners under that Act. So my work was in collaboration with the Northern Land Council, with the late Mr. Arquette and other leaders there, Mr. Unipingu, of course, and their previous chairs, working with them to set up the lobbying that needed to go to the federal parliament.
Yeah. And
to defend the positions. I'll just finish on one critical thing that happened was that the government under Hawke and Gareth Evans and people like that wanted to change, under pressure from the mining industry, the right to negotiate, which at that time in the Act there was an ability for the traditional owners to say yes at exploration and no at mining. So they wanted to get rid of that and just make one decision.
One decision for a short period of time.
We worked for a whole week with a subcommittee of the caucus, which is probably a rare thing, where the caucus formed a subcommittee, the Federal Caucus Aboriginal Affairs Committee, which wasn't just the Labor Party or the Parliament, it was the crossbenchers and the opposition, who'd come to Alice Springs, and then we went to Darwin. We ended up at down south of Batchelor there, where the results were relayed back to our councils, and we were. But it was a hard work, and many of those good staff in both land councils worked really hard. I remember Marcia Langton, for instance, who was working for the Central Land Council, at about 3 or 4 in the morning, we're all bunkered down in the Northern Land Council, and she's arguing with Gareth Evans on the floor and highlighting how decision making goes and why it's important for people to get their country back and to have a say over that country if someone else wants to come in there. And then we ended up in Lake Bennett. But there was constantly pressure, constant pressure to amend the Act to the detriment of the people's rights and interests.
Yeah.
At every turn under the territory legislation. And then obviously I got involved in, I think, one of the precursors to the ILSC, which was the Indigenous Development Foundation, or whatever it was called.
ADC.
ADC.
Yeah.
And I was the deputy chair of that with Shirley McPherson as the chair. And that had a group of, and this is a time when there was transition going on between Aboriginal Affairs, which Mr. Perkins was running, and the morphing of that into ATSIC.
Yep.
And of course, there was a whole lot of politics outside of my understanding that was happening, except what I understood was that the new structure was going to be elected regional councils and a national elected body, which would give the people the say in how they wanted to be managed and run and have their affairs advocated for them to the federal parliament and to the minister.
Yeah.
And rather than a department dominating their lives and saying what they can or can't do and having all the power.
Yeah.
So we went through all of that process, and I was very fortunate to have some really good leaders. Lowitja O'Donoghue, the late Lowitja, Dr. O'Donoghue was one of the serious leaders. Mr. Yu, Dr. Yu, Terry O'Shane from Robbie Lee, you'd remember from that. I'm sorry to mention these names because some of them are past, but they were the good people, and some old ladies from around Toowoomba. So we got caught in the middle a bit of the bigger politics, where some people had the access to the parliament and others didn't.
Yeah.
And the creation of this new entity called ATSIC was emerging. And out of that, of course, it was also how do we sustain the fund to help people get access to buy houses or to buy businesses. And that was always a critical factor, and also to support Aboriginal people to come together, either in sporting entities or in other ways, to discuss the things that mattered to them, that was impacting their lives. So the ILSC, as it is now, and some of the other precursors, were instrumental I suppose in a real way. They may not have intended to do this, but they brought people together as boards or as members, which enabled them to have these discussions. And the ATSIC, of course, had a huge office in Canberra, which a lot of people gravitated to from around the country to meet.
Yep.
So it was a very vibrant time. The rights of people to land and the creation of policies, the environmental movement, and the movement to parallel with that was these on-country management programs. I forget what you'd know these things, but there are these things where the rural industry, you try to get the rural industry and the local Aboriginal groups working together. Rick Farley, the late Rick Farley, had a lot to do with this, but basically land management programs that were beneficial to non-Aboriginal pastoralists, but also gave access and use of their lands back to Aboriginal people when they didn't hold the tenure, and cared for the country, so that feral animals and weeds and all of those things could be under control. A lot of criticism about the creation of parks at that time, because they said, well, parks are not resource; they don't get enough money to control the vermin and the other things that waft over onto the pastoral leases or the palms or whatever. And gradually, I think that division was broken down through these good interactions or positive programs that the ILSC or the ILC was running, as well as these other programs of Greening Australia or whatever they're called. So it was a time prior to native title. So it was a time when people thought of land in terms of land rights. And land rights has two dimensions to it. One is what Aboriginal people think of as their rights to land, and what the white fellas think of in terms of legislation
Yeah.
and the rights and interests that they might grant you out of their goodness that you can enjoy. Whereas Aboriginal people have a whole different idea. The land is a living entity. They belong to that land, and they have responsibilities and accountabilities to that land, and it sustains them.
Yeah. What about the water as well?
And the water. When I talk about land, I include water and
Yeah.
sky and wind and lightning and everything. It's everything in the environment.
Yeah.
It's what I call land or country, because they all have meaning and they have relationships to people. And when you sever that, you're basically cutting a serious artery to the life sustaining forces of Aboriginal people. And people become ill. They might look healthy, but they become ill because they're missing something.
Yeah.
It's like the stolen generations who were taken away, told no one wanted them, you know. I mean, it was a lie. But on the other side, it's like the foundations of a road where you pack it down and you have good foundation and you lay your black surface on top of it.
Yeah.
To get good traffic. So there are structures. If you look at it, depends which way you want to look at it. The Aboriginal people's relationship to land is the fundamental structure. It's critical in today's system with environmental change and modernisation and development and resource extraction and high levels of mobility and use, that people don't sever their link with the land. It's not just anyone's country. You're tied to the country you come from.
Yeah.
Your spirit is from that land, from that place. But you respect the rules that go with the country when you go to someone else's country.
Yeah.
They're the bosses for those places. You are their guests. They look after you and they tell you where you can or what you can't do on those lands. Now, that's a respect we all had and we still should have when we deal with other people's lands. It's not a power-based thing. It's a responsibility to look after someone.
Yeah.
Coming onto your ground, and your responsibility is to do things that are not going to destroy that land, interfere with it, or assert a presence somewhere that you shouldn't be in.
Yeah.
So many marches were always around land rights, you know, in Sydney, Melbourne, and particularly if there's an international event like the Springboks coming to Brisbane, there's a huge, and always the land rights chant would go up. Land rights, when do we want it? Now. You know?
Yeah.
What do we got? And there's a different phrase that used to come out. But it was, and there were good people. There were a lot of young people who were in the front of those things, who never got to be the media talent, as it were, but were really courageous and carried the burden of these things that are probably unsung in many ways.
Yep. What about this notion, and people use these phrases these days and they call it, traditional knowledge or Indigenous knowledge, all those sorts of things, entwined with, obviously when you're talking about land and country or generally, it's entwined with laws and customs and people's practices and beliefs, which are always, difficult to explain to Westerners, that there's spiritual things in the country as well, in terms of people's ability to connect and the things that people do, their obligations to that. It's not just a biophysical thing, it's also a spiritual thing.
Yeah, and it is difficult because it's a valid different story.
Yeah.
The land is not just real estate and property and development and extraction. That's a westernized concept. Aboriginal people's connection to land is what gives them their being. It makes them whom they are.
Yeah.
It goes to the very core. Now, you can say you're born in Australia if you're an Australian. Well, that's true, and people do have very strong links, but they don't come from the time before time, the beginning of time.
Yeah.
Ugarigara, the dreaming story from the land, and they don't carry the ceremony from that land.
Yeah.
That reinforces their obligations, responsibilities, and the roles that people have got. The different roles for people in the customary systems on land, and who can do what and when, and who has to be in place in order to deliver the responsibilities. There's strengths and weaknesses to some of that, and we've seen that that's why when you take people away, or you break those links, or you destroy kinship relationships, or you bring in a brand of belief that ridicules and belittles the Aboriginal spiritual belief systems, which has happened, of course, through churches and other people, and assimilation policy, the whole ethos and ideology of that to make Aboriginal people into white folks, destroyed a hell of a lot of the capacity for people to practice their kinship relationship to their country. Hasn't got rid of it because it's in them. And it's amazing that you can meet people from other parts of the world, First Nations peoples, and we all have a link. We can link as human beings, and we link because we have this link to the country, and we feel as one, as a family. Now, we don't often find that with non-Aboriginal people, and that's something that faces them, that they've got to deal with. Because unless they find that, they're going to destroy this planet. They're going to destroy the biodiversity, the ecosystems, the geological formations, etc. So until we start to understand that human beings is the critical factor, not whether you're white, black, or brindle, or whether you've got a university degree, or whether you're a person that's never been to school. Human beings are the crux of our survival. And if we don't find ways to enable human beings to become fully themselves, and that is connecting to their country, to their land, to their people, to their traditions and practices, and enabling that to happen, then you're creating more and more people who are detached and isolated and alienated. And that's the world of loneliness that so many Western people live in. And money doesn't answer that, because they don't know how to reconnect. Wealth and power and that sort of authority leads to destruction, as we see with wars, with power trying to kill each other. They haven't learned to respect the value of the human being who we might disagree with, but Aboriginal people had ways to deal with the disagreements. We have a ceremonial context where you deal with that, and that's why we have a kinship structure. Not everyone's the same, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to marry anyone. You wouldn't have father-in-laws, mother-in-laws. You wouldn't have brother-in-laws and people like that who are critical to the sustainability of the communal dimension of your life.
That's interesting, because that's something I've been talking about for a while too, this sort of notion, particularly in Australia here, we see people, and I use the example of when we have these big summer bushfires on the East Coast, everyone's sort of panicking about it, and they treat the environment as if it's something separate to people, therefore it should be managed separately. And the sort of intrinsic nature of Indigenous ideology, I say, where Indigenous people are part of nature, therefore you shouldn't be seeing that and these fires are a bad thing. We should be seeing these things as a good thing, and that nature is part of us, and we are part of nature. Therefore, we've got to reconnect with nature and treat country as we sort of treat ourselves and treat each other.
Absolutely.
And embed people back into the middle of it. Otherwise, we're always going to have this issue of our environment degrading at the behest of us, a capital society, going forward. And that's something I think, is a serious problem in Australia, where people see the environment to be exploited or something separate to them, where it's actually fundamental to people's existence.
Well, it's absolutely vital and essential to the survival of the human beings. And humans have got a responsibility to look after the earth and the planet and look after the human beings. If you don't look after the species, it always amazes me, and one of the few things I get a bit cranky about, Joe, is see the roadkill. Kangaroo, emu, I don't see too many wombats, but Indigenous animals being killed by motor cars or cranes or some other means and left. And then you're looking having sat in the Parliament House, look at the coat of arms, you see a kangaroo and emu, you think,
Yeah.
Why isn't this? Why aren't these two animals revered in the way we should revere them?
Yeah.
And that's just because people are in a rush. They don't care. They got motor cars built to destroy anything if it bumps into it. But you're going to have a relationship, and the relationships which you got to fear, because you do harm, it'll return on you.
Yeah.
It'll come back to you or your family, your people, and you won't get away. Wherever you travel, this country keeps an eye on you. It watches you, see how you behave, what you say, where you go, how you treat people, how you look after things.
Yeah.
You're not isolated, but you shouldn't be frightened of that. You should be proud of that. That there's a spiritual dimension, oversighting, overwatching, that can help you readjust. The motor cars today, they put things in them that if you drift too far this way or that way, it'll push you back.
Yeah.
Well, think of the spiritual reality that Aboriginal people live in is like that. It's a force that you can't see, but you know and you experience. And when it's not there, that's when damage is done.
Yeah.
And I think there are ways for the non-Aboriginal people to find their spiritual essence, but they got to be attuned to it. We find it by listening to the wind and the trees and watching the dust and watching how animals live or how human beings behave. They might watch it when looking at the stock exchange. I don't know how they find it, but they've got to find a way to connect to the humanity, not their aspiration of becoming something, but their basic core humanity. And that's why the programs that the ILSC undertakes to try and get people back on their country, to support them in their relationships, to seek sustainability and to seek management programs for the land and fire burning or water protection or replenishment of the species. All of those things are critical. It's not something that's back there.
Yeah.
This is critical to today.
Yeah.
It's part of tomorrow, because if we don't have this connection to tomorrow through what we do today, in the way we look after things and other human beings, we'll be lesser for it.
Yeah. So the ILC, or what it's now ILSC, has been through various sort of iterations, and it's been, I guess, doing things and undertaking things, many years ago that perhaps aren't seen to be the right way of supporting self-determination. And I use the example of, perhaps some of our business interests where it was ILSC focused rather than people focused. And obviously we're trying to change that paradigm now. I think what you're talking about is this sort of very important fundamental question of people and country, which I think the ILSC is coming back to. But do you think that the ILSC could and should play a bigger role in amplifying and telling the story of Indigenous people's connection to country, as well as obviously many other organisations are doing that too? But just because we have a mandate of acquiring property, whether it's land and water, do you think we should be doing more about, telling that story about, well, it's Australia's story really, about the connection that people have with country, and really at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're Indigenous or not, because we all need to have this better understanding and connection to country.
Well, you're right. The ILSC or the ILC drifted away and became a commercial white man kind of entity, which saw and probably political pressure on it forced it in that direction. In the sense that you had to create an economic base to be sustainable, and rather than that economic base being developed by the people who's meant to be the beneficiaries of the purchases, they'd lost sight of that a bit. But I think that's a good lesson to have learnt, and I think that it has got a critical role as a carer for the country. Because you're guided, I would presume, as a board, the board is guided by the aspirations of the people that come to you to seek assistance. But I think you've got a bigger role in helping the country understand why the Aboriginal people's connection to this country is important, and why they need to connect, not to usurp, take over, or acculturate matters that are not theirs, but to understand that they need a dimension to the way they live, which is beyond retail, which is beyond throwaway goods, which is beyond non-care for the consequences of their actions. Because if they don't develop a sense of concern for what they do, then they themselves are going to be the worse off. Indigenous peoples aren't the majority, so there'll be collateral damage in the stupidity that marches forward on that basis. So you have a very important educative role to the public, not to take away the role of local owners or traditional bosses, but work in collaboration with them, but to extract the macro principles of what it is that's important, and comment on that. A bit like the Productivity Commission, those sorts of bodies that can comment on the value of the public expenditure for the purpose of which the public monies were provided. But to give a health of the nation from the Indigenous perspective in terms of caring for country and for human beings through relationship to each other and to the country. So I think there's a real role for an entity like yours to be the barometer of some of that and to bring that to the attention. Otherwise, you're reliant upon studies that are done by the Western institutions, which are fine and they're important. Environmental departments are very important and fine, but they're about sustaining the paradigm in the main. I think your role should be, well, I'm not telling you what your role should be, but I think there is this big role for the person or the group that looks after what happens on the ground. And Aboriginal customary practices, there are two sorts of people: the bosses for the land and the people that manage what happens on that land. Now you fit into this category of the managers. So you sit above those managers to make sure that the managers are managing and that the bosses are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And you have a right to comment on that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a unique role that the ILSC has, because obviously it's independent. It has its board and it can't be directed by governments and so forth. But at the same time, it's got this independent fund that allows it to do its business in terms of acquiring property. But one of the things I wanted to turn to was this successful movement that Indigenous people, and particularly in Northern Australia, but now it's spread nationally, which is this caring for country movement. And we see rangers, the Yari Rangers are quite successful. There's quite a few young people now stepping into it, working with old people, the bosses, as you say. Did you want to say something about that and the importance of that for not just Aboriginal people, but again, the nation?
Well, I remember as a young kid going to the Katherine primary school, and we had nature study. It was a subject. I don't know whether they even do that anymore in schools, but they've probably got a different name. But this was a teacher trying to take us out on country to explain to us what these things were: butterflies or flowers or bees or trees or whatever. And we knew all of that because we lived all of that every day of the week. We knew more about the country than these teachers, but they at least were trying to instill in a formal education structure the importance of that, and capturing, getting leaves and formations and sticking them in books, all of that sort of botany or something they used to call it. But there is this need for people to understand not just the beauty and the richness of this biodiversity and its interconnectedness to everything, but that they are connected to this. It's strange for them to understand that, but they are connected to it, and that their existence depends on the sustainability of those diversities and differences. There are some things that they've introduced, like cane toads and fire ants and whatever else, that are destructive to the natural environment. And you have a biodiversity security structure to stop things from coming in, bird flus and whatever. So you need governments to be attentive to those alien factors, the carp, for instance, in the waterways.
Yeah.
You know, these are all alien things. But someone's got to be at the top. Whether the government likes it or not, it's got to be informing the government of the impact of its ecological, environmental laws on the nation. Now, there are authorities, all sorts of authorities that are meant to be doing that. But I think the Aboriginal people, the Indigenous peoples, through your organisation, the ILSC, have got a unique role because you're interacting with a whole diversity of people with traditional customs and practice in Arnhem Land or the Territory or, you know, Western Australia or Queensland. And then you've got diverse groups of people who are re-establishing their links in many ways and doing a good job of it, or trying to bring forward the foundations, those eel traps in Victoria, for instance. They're trying to bring forward that sort of technology that was used by their old people in the farming of those species in a management way. So there's a real role to and the diversity of grasses and, you know, these things. People can understand that, but they need to have an authentic Aboriginal entity like the ILSC. Just on that, the other day I noticed the Institute of Architects, for instance, have developed 2 books on how to relate to Aboriginal people and the terminology and the way we look at country or the terms we use and how they might understand how to interact with Aboriginal people. That's a good thing. That role could be encouraged across other professional groups. I know some of them talk about cultural competent programs or whatever, but they've got to have methodologies and they've got to hold people to account.
Yeah.
If we had that in the criminal justice system, maybe the deaths in custody would diminish, and the need for people to be in the custody situation might diminish as well if there were proper protocols about this.
Just on that, I mean, we have seen a rise of Indigenous groups around the country really interested in this, providing self-care and these wellbeing centres and so forth. So there's a lot of people who are providing even a dialysis service like the guys in Central Australia are doing, and we've been supporting that. But there's also these wellbeing places that are very important as well. So people being back in touch with their country is not just a physical and a cultural thing, but also a mental health and a physical health outcome as well. Obviously, that's something that you're across as well with the work that you've done in various places.
Well, it's an important thing. I think what people are going to not lose sight of it, that this is a collective matter. There's, individuals might have a particular gift at healing, but it's a collective matter.
Yeah.
It belongs to a people, and you've got to be accountable to those people for the way and the manner in which you deliver that. So if I wanted to set myself up as some kind of a guru to heal people, I'd want to make sure that I was endorsed by the bosses of the land in those activities. I'm not saying that there aren't going to be changes to the way you think. Traditionally, there were ways to do some of these things, and there were certain people who were, as you know, Nungaras or healing people or, you know, Marvin people who could do things to help people, and they're probably carrying. They might have a special gift that they're exercising in a cross-cultural world, but be aware that when it relates to the land and to the spirituality of the land, it's got to be connected to that land. It can't be to something alien.
Yeah. Turning back to the concept of caring for country and you know, one of the great things that whole movement has done, and also the advent of rangers, when we see thousands of rangers around the country now who are probably doing more important work for the nation in terms of managing nature than what has ever happened since contact. What sort of message would you have for, you know, young people who are interested in this sort of connection to country and you know, following on from the decades of land rights, native title, getting access to country through ILSC and other means? What message would you have to young people about their importance of getting back to country?
Well, it's being a ranger, whether you're a young man or young woman, is a very important avenue for that to happen. For you to be out on country and to be doing things in your country or on the country of peoples, and you're learning, and you not only learn the science about what, not just the terms for things in a Western science sense, but you're learning about the relationship of the species to the season, and to the I suppose proliferation of these things, and the management, and the life cycle.
Yeah.
And you've got to learn that and study it and see that that's critical and it has lessons for you on how you should behave and live in your relationships with other human beings. It's a non-ending learning process, so you never get beyond the capacity to learn. And if you do, you should sit somewhere and listen to the wind in the leaves of the trees and hear what's being said to you, because you are always learning. Even at my age, you learn and learn about what nature can teach you, what you learn from nature, where you're led to in your thinking about it. Build on that experience you have, but be open to learning. This is going to be a critical area with the development now of this artificial intelligence technologies and methodologies and so forth. You've actually got to be on the ground. You can't learn this from the books. You can learn so much from books and study and seminars and workshops, but you actually have to be on the ground. You have to be on the country. You got to be sleeping on the ground, sitting on the ground, dancing on the ground, and using that product from the ground for how you survive and how you relate, and where your strength comes from. It doesn't come from my capacity to use a computer. It comes from where that land is and where that land does to me and makes me strong, because the spirits of all the ancestors inside of this. So there's important for young people to know that that's available to them. It's available to them, and because of the interruption by Western civilization or Western colonization, doesn't mean you can't be connected.
Yeah.
That's a piece of propaganda that they use to say you can't go back. You can always go back or go forward. But the thing is, don't stay in the present believing you can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's a very big disservice that happened to Aboriginal people. The assimilationist policy that took kids away, that made people think that they couldn't be Aboriginal people, and made Aboriginal people turn against each other, etc.
Yeah.
But we are, in essence, a spiritual people, and we have a capacity to link across our own original origins, from this country to other people, Papua New Guinea, even the Pacific, north of us, and America, Native Americans and others. We have a capacity to sit at the one ground with those people. They might have a different way of expressing their culture to ours, but it's all linked to their land and their origins and their spiritual belief and their forward thinking, So that's a tremendous gift that young people have got to realise, that they've got the essence of that, and their encounter with the activities they do builds their capacity to look for a better vision of how to express things in the future, because there's going to be change and modification, and some great examples of human triumph over suppression and isolation. You look at the great leaders, Mandela and even Bonhoeffer and these blokes who were jailed and told that you couldn't believe this or that, but triumphed out of those systems. And we can do the same, and the young people can do the same. There is a future of being an Aboriginal person. There's a future of being linked to this country. There's a future of being a professional if you want to pursue an academic career, but never lose your roots.
Yeah.
Never lose your roots, where you come from, who your old people are, and where your people come from, where the desert, from the river, from the hills, from the sea, whatever, wherever your people come from. Never lose that connection, and go and visit those countries and sit there.
Yeah.
Old people mightn't be there, but sit there and they'll talk to you.
Yeah. I mean, certainly it's there's a growing appreciation that the most special places left on the planet, that is places high in biodiversity, but not just biodiversity, cultural diversity, are the places that are managed by Indigenous people all over the world. And you look at the Kimberley, for example, some of the most important spots in the Kimberley are managed by Aboriginal rangers and senior traditional owners and so forth, and that tells a lot, not just in terms of the history, but also coming up with strategies for climate change. Climate change being one of these things that has gone around in policy discussions and debates for a good 20 or 30 years now, but I think disproportionately Indigenous people feel it, but they also have some amazing solutions, and we've seen that as well with the fire reduction programs in Northern Australia, being able to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere. Indigenous people are very well placed to contribute to a global effort towards dealing with some of these things. What do you think
Yeah,
about
no, I agree with you. And I think we're also capable of coexistence with economic processes. So if you run a cattle station, but you can also deal with the cultural and environmental components on the same ground,
Yeah.
on the same land, or within the same lease, and sustain your productivity. So there are ways to support diversity on country, but there's always got to be respect, and you can't preference one over the other. Your natural biodiversity and environmental factors are critical for the sustainability of us as people.
Yeah.
Obviously, economic programs and processes are critical for the future independence of Aboriginal people from over-reliance on public sector outlays. So balancing that under the guise of sustainability is the challenge. That the young people can learn how to find the mechanisms to get the balances.
Yeah.
And it becomes more critical because if you introduce alien crops or modification to vegetation, and they escape and interfere with the natural bush or natural disasters you mentioned before, fire and floods and even levelling of country, all of these things that type of topography is gone because they've laser levelled it for wheat or rice or something.
Yeah.
You've got to know what underpins that, or what the story is that runs over that land and is still in that ground.
Yeah.
So it's important to understand. Don't pretend you know something if you don't know it.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing. You don't expect, as an Aboriginal person, you have to know everything because you can't know everything and you shouldn't be asked to know everything. So as a young person, don't feel the burdens of people expecting you to tell them everything or to take responsibility for it because you're learning and you take your time to learn, but you learn. That's the key thing. You learn and you observe and you weigh up the merits of what's being said to you. And there's things Western science can help with.
Yeah.
It can help with some of these things to just help in the sustainability. And that's the meeting of the minds and the heart has got to come there.
Yeah. Sounds like the reconciliation movement, Pat. Getting to something else, and we're getting close to wrapping up the podcast, but I'm thinking about a conversation that you and I have had a number of times, and it really is around this notion of economies and getting Indigenous people more economically self-dependent. Do you think that, there's obviously more work to be done there, and what sort of role do you think the ILSC could be playing in that space?
Well, obviously, the independence of Aboriginal people is critical, and their responsibility and accountability structures that they need to build back in their lives and in places is critical for the sustainability of our people. People can't live in poverty and be at the margins of the mainstream society if they expect to be in managing and controlling their lives. But on the other hand, you don't have to take the option of going down the one-way street of assimilation. You've got to find the balance and you've got to find ways to adjust and modify those things. There is a need for productivity. I'm a firm believer in trying to find ways where the collective are as much the beneficiary as the individual.
Yeah.
So a lot of people can get rich quick because they're smart and they know how to do things, and they can sever their relationships with their families and friends and their extended obligations. Now that's an individual approach. You know, when I see people around this town who are marginalised, sitting on the footpaths or pushing shopping trolleys looking for a place to sleep, that doesn't make me happy, because somehow they've been left behind. And they've got to find ways to help themselves, but they need help to help themselves. And when you lose the collective responsibility and accountability components to the pursuit of wealth, I think you're getting outside the margin of supporting Aboriginal people to be sustainable in their own right as unique social collectives that have got a tremendous amount to offer to the challenges of Western society.
Yeah. So, I mean, ILSC's role is to acquire property. I mean, I think there could be more. It's arguable whether there's more that the ILSC could do to help amplify and tell these stories, at least about Indigenous, self-determination, and how that some of these groups, I mean, Yarra is a good example, but there's many others around the country, how they've sort of, walking those paths of walking your own cultural path, but also walking a path where you can become economic self-sufficient, and that's one of our big challenges, I think.
I think you've got to be given the role of bringing all those environmental agencies and biodiversity agencies in the country, where you have a role to inform them about the health of the country from the Indigenous perspective, and to look at the dynamics that should be underpinning the growth of the non-Indigenous person into getting a greater relationship with the country and a greater sustainable way of living, rather than the madness which some people get caught and get left behind and to push to the margins. So there's a connection, not just through your own individual activities to help Aboriginal people, but to help the non-Aboriginal people themselves find better ways. And you should have a role by way of right into those other functions of government where there are agencies or responsible bodies that look after the environment or the biodiversity.
Yeah. All right, we'll get into the last question now, Pat. Just in terms of summarising, what do you think about where we've come from, and just take. You started off the podcast or the interview talking about your time growing up in Katherine, and knowing how difficult it was back then for people to where we are now. Where do you think we as a people and for the ILSC, where we could be heading into the future?
Well, as I say, I was fortunate because there were a lot of old people around, and I could observe them, and they would talk to me, and I'd relate to them, and I could see them in their behaviours. I worry today that people talk about old people as if they're some kind of mythological being, and they don't have that relationship, and because of the way their lives have been crowded, and they're forced down individualism with nuclear type families. I worry about that, because that leads you to just put people in homes when they become inconvenient to look after, rather than looking after those people when they become difficult to look after. But they're the ones that gave you life or looked after you. So there are means and methods of the way we live that we've got to care for the people as much as care for our own individual family and thing. But the ILSC's got a role to help people get their country back, more of it, but they can't, to work at sustainability programs that will help them not only become economically viable, but also to maintain the biodiversity and the environmental places, and to enable collectives, communities, to come from those groups back onto their ground, so that they can be strengthened by being there, celebrating it, enjoying it, and contributing to the life of the country itself.
Any final remarks, Pat, before we close?
I just think you're doing a great job, Joe. keep it up. I think the ILSC is a very critical construct of the Parliament, but its guidance and management over the years has been good people on your boards, good CEOs, an eye on the economics, but an eye on the sustainability, and a real concern for the relationship of people to country and to family and to extended family. Young people understand extended family and kinship, and we're not a mob of cattle. We belong to particular groups of people.
Well, I want to thank you for putting a little bit of time aside today for joining us on this podcast series. This will certainly be, I think, one of those podcasts in our series that's highlighted simply because it's not just about the ILSC itself, but the environment in which we found ourselves in over the last 30 or 40 years and what's led us to where we are now, but also some insights into where we could be. I want to thank you, Pat. You've always been someone inspirational for myself, and so I really thank you for providing that inspiration, not just to me, but to many Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people around the country. But most importantly, thank you for today. Thanks.
Thanks for the opportunity, Joe. Travel well.